Welcome to the American Research Center in Egypt's second episode in our series, A History of Egyptology. This series explores the West's nearly 2,000-year fascination with Egypt. Its goal is to highlight how Egypt has impacted different peoples throughout the ages and how it continues to do so. Our first episode explored some of the interest that the ancient Greeks and Romans showed in Egypt and the influence that Egypt had upon their societies. This second episode continues the story. In the 5th century A.D., the western half of the Roman Empire collapsed. Some people still refer to this period that followed in Europe as the Dark Ages, a time when knowledge and resources were lost and people lived in ignorance. In fact, this period was anything but that. The disintegration of the Roman Empire saw the different regions it once controlled fragment into their own independent units. As the empire fragmented, these different units held on to knowledge that had been acquired while it was whole. As a result, books mentioning Egypt continued to exist and be read in the European Middle Ages. Perhaps the best-known example of an important book with references to Egypt is the Bible. The Roman Empire's conversion to Christianity in the 4th century A.D. helped spread the Bible throughout Europe, which, in turn, ensured that people had an accessible source on Egypt. Christian scripture contains many references to Egypt, and the Bible would have provided a natural starting point for anyone interested in the land of the Nile. Other opportunities also existed for early Europeans to come into contact with ideas or objects associated with Egypt, and these opportunities provoked further interest. The Crusades, for example, provided a new means by which Near Eastern elements could find their way to Europe, and Europeans might find their way to the Near East. In addition, Europeans who traveled to Egypt during this period took to documenting their journeys. The hugely popular travels of Sir John Mandeville, a story about an imaginary knight who at one point finds himself in Egypt, is a good example of such travel accounts. While the story is fictitious, it is based upon many real-life travel accounts that existed at that time. The 16th and early 17th centuries saw Europeans bring more than personal accounts back from Egypt. People started traveling to collect Egyptian antiquities, and they became interested in using Egyptian motifs as decoration in their own art and architecture. It was also during this period that Europeans became interested in the strange writing of the ancient Egyptians, a language that had died out centuries before. The German Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher used an ancient Greek treatise on hieroglyphs, supposedly written by a man named Horapollo, in one of the earliest attempts to translate ancient Egyptian. While his translations were very wrong, his work prompted a new interest in Coptic, a language still read by Egypt's Christian population and the last surviving form of ancient Egyptian. The Enlightenment gave Europeans new mental and physical tools to make sense of the world around them, and some people used them to explore Egypt. The English mathematician and astronomer John Greaves tried to measure and explain Egyptian pyramids, while other scholars began to broaden the study of Egypt beyond isolated objects, hieroglyphs, and pyramids. The French Jesuit Claude Sicard traveled through Egypt and explored its monuments. Using ancient Greek and Roman texts, he correctly re-identified several ancient sites and monuments and produced an early map of Egypt. While Sicard's original work was lost, letters on it were preserved and later formed the basis for the French cartographer Jean-Baptiste Bourguignon d'Anville's 1765 map of Egypt, a map that would continue to influence travelers to Egypt right up until the early 1800s. In the early 1700s, Europeans' interest in and exploration of the world, along with their thoughts of different people's place in the world, led them to some surprising conclusions. Letters by Benoit Dumaillet, at one time a French consul in Cairo, were published by Jean-Baptiste Le Mascrier in a text that described Egypt as a doomed, despotic, ailing state. This bias against contemporary Egyptian society would be picked up and used by Napoleon to help justify his invasion of Egypt at the end of the 1700s. European interest in and information on Egypt also increased in the early 1700s due to the spread of popular books on the country. Two such works were Frederick Norden's Travel in Egypt and Nubia and Richard Pocock's A Description of the East and Some Other Countries. Both Norden's and Pocock's work provided readers with many images of Egypt's monuments as well as plans and maps. During the 18th century, along with an increase in European travelers, came improved studies of ancient Egypt. This newly focused interest in Egypt laid the foundation for the explosion that was soon to follow. In the next episode, we'll continue our story of the European exploration of Egypt through the Enlightenment and into the modern era.